Fox News alert on some possible big changes in the works for the men and women who run our armed services. Welcome to a brand new hour of America Live, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. After a series of recent scandals involving high-ranking officers, the military now wants generals and admirals to be evaluated by their peers and the very folks they command. The new effort is being led by General Martin Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. It's part of a broad overhaul of training and development programs for the military's top brass. But are we now telling our commanders that being popular with the troops is more important than making good decisions? Pete Hegseth is the CEO of Concerned Veterans for America. Tony Schaefer is a retired U.S. Army lieutenant colonel and a senior fellow at the Center for Advanced Defense Studies. So they say this is required because there's been some conduct issues at the top ranks, and now what we really need is peer review, so the folks who are not generals and admirals get to say, he's not a nice guy, he's not an ethical guy, he needs to go from 4 stars to 3 stars, and so on. Pete, your thoughts on it?
Well, I mean, the military has faced a perception problem. There haven't been more cases of general officers' misconduct. There have just been some higher profile cases. And so the chairman's reacting to the perception. Perception is important of the officer class. But I don't know that the solution is giving, Captain Hegseth more input. He thinks about General so-and-so. I want that general to see me as a tool on the battlefield to be used and wielded effectively to fight and win wars. And, I wonder what kind of peer reviews a General MacArthur or a General Patton would have gotten. I don't know how popular they would have been with their peers, but we know they were capable of leading men on the battlefield. We don't want to create an environment where bureaucratic operators or risk-averse operators who everyone likes are the ones promoted, while those who are maybe a little bit rough around the edges don't make their way through the chain because they've ticked off some people in a peer review.
That's the thing, Colonel Schaefer. I mean, if the military, last time I checked, wasn't really a democracy. You don't get to be a general or admiral or a colonel like you because you're popular. It's because you're effective, and sometimes being effective doesn't mean you're the nicest guy.
And as I recall, General Benford Peet, a former Vice Chief of the Staff of the Army, said the Army's job is to win wars. And I think that's what we're losing focus of here. The idea should be is that you be effective on the battlefield to actually win the battles that you are faced with. Patton would not have survived a peer review, I'm sure. Eisenhower, who had problems with, he slept with his driver, Kate Summersby. And again, in today's standards, these generals who are brilliant, absolutely able to do the very best job for the country, would not have survived. So this whole idea that we're going to this peer review, that if I like you, you must be good, is totally insane. We've got to get back focused on measures of effectiveness, not measures of performance. Right now, we perform to a standard. That standard may or may not achieve the battle requirements that we have to achieve to win, but we got to step away from this whole idea that we can somehow bring a negotiated process, a democracy to the military, to think somehow it would be more effective. It simply won't.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, lots of people love Oprah Winfrey, but do we really want General Winfrey running the next war?
Right.
I mean, and there's a question about whether this is going to wind up with the most effective leader. Let me tell you what the New York Times has an interesting article quoting a Richard Cohn, who's a professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He specializes in military culture, and he thinks this is a great idea. He says, quote, "It will reduce what the military calls toxic leadership, elevating those who are highly competent, but also fair and less brusque and peremptory." Pete?
I want brusque, I want brisk, I want harsh when I'm on a battlefield. I want a decisive decision maker. I want someone who's going to calculate all the risks and ultimately mitigate them where he can, but take risks that will further our mission and advance ourselves toward victory. Those are the types of leaders I want, not someone who's going to put a finger in the wind. We got enough of that in Washington. We got enough politicians. We don't need politicians. We need war fighters, and we don't need a process that puts more impediments between war fighters being promoted as opposed to bureaucratic operators.
Colonel, the thing is, from the sound of it, they're not looking to replace the guy. I mean, they're not looking to create a military culture where it's like, if you could just fall into line and march forward, that would be so great. Thank you so much for helping us out. They're not looking for that, but they talk about how, A, we've had some sexual misconduct and improprieties discovered in the military, but B, they also do talk about how some who have been recently relieved of duty or demoted for, quote, inappropriate leadership and judgment.
This goes back to Washington's Army. The same thing happened there. As a matter of fact, part of the problem is we have not fired generals for incompetence since the Vietnam War. In World War II, they would fire people for not being the best they could be to actually win the battles. Right now, the standard is, oh my goodness, it's all about perception. And if we do this, it'll even be more about perception. We're going in the direction of having warrior monks. Let me tell you something. That's not what people sign up for. People have human frailties, and those frailties should not be showstoppers. We have this single defect military right now. You make one mistake, you're out. And again, Megyn, we got to be careful about this. For example, General Crystal, I went with Bill O'Reilly when General Crystal was on his way back to get fired, and I said that night, he shouldn't get fired. And it turned out the IG even agreed with me in the end, because the things that were attributed to him were not. And that's what the problem is. The perception be completely wrong of the reality, and you make bad decisions, and you create a toxic environment that will see more of this politically correct nonsense.
Well, speaking of politically correct, I should have been referring to Pete as Captain, but he comes on once a week, and I always call him Pete. So I have Colonel and Captain, so with all due respect to both of you, thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you.
Everyone outranks me.
Not me. Well, for a little more context, let's take a look at these numbers. Since 2009, 8 generals, 1 admiral, and 2 lieutenant generals have either retired or been forced out for things like sexual misconduct, sexual violence, and financial wrongdoing. And the chairman of the Joint Chiefs says, look, some of these generals, especially in modern-day warfare, have become like rock stars, and there needs to be more of a sort of citizen's check on them, or at least enlisted man check on them, and that's what he's trying to accomplish.